Welcome to the Secular Homeschool Revolution podcast. This is a space for progressive secular homeschoolers who are questioning the systems that we were taught and are reimagining what education looks like at home. We talk about learning, unlearning, power dynamics, culture, and what it actually means to raise curious, critical thinkers in a world shaped by systems we didn't choose. This is a space for listening, reflecting, and growing. It's definitely not for perfection. And I am your host, Ashley, and I'm really glad that you are here. Today, we are talking about literacy. And that doesn't necessarily mean reading levels or Lexile levels or whether or not your kid is reading on grade level. We are talking about literacy as power, literacy as voice, literacy as who gets to be believed and who gets corrected. Because one of the biggest myths I feel like in progressive homeschooling is that we can just swap out or change books on our shelf and we can say, oh, we have diversified our reading or we've decolonized literacy. And that's not really how that works. And you can have the most inclusive bookshelf in the world and still be teaching literacy in a way that silences kids. So today, that's what I want to focus on. I want to break down what dominant literacy teaches us, what decolonized literacy actually looks like at home, and how do we support reading and writing without recreating brick and mortar school at home. What does dominant literacy teach? And I also want to go into how this is parallel with my beef with etiquette classes. A lot of us were taught that literacy looks like you can read and decode words and answer questions correctly because of the text. It means your writing looks nice and neat. You have proper grammar. You know the basics of a sentence structure and a paragraph structure, and you're good at language, which means you sound polished and controlled and academic. And me personally, right? This whole podcast is about my opinion. I don't think those skills are useless, so to speak, but they definitely are not neutral. And this is where I want to pause and make the comparison because I think it's fair. I think it's a fair comparison with etiquette classes because etiquette classes usually are framed around, this is how you behave properly. This is how you speak correctly. This is how you move through the world. This is what makes you more acceptable. And what it's really teaching is this is how to make other people feel comfortable. This is how to code switch for power. This is how not to stand out. And this is how to perfectly assimilate. And that's aligned with what dominant literacy does. It teaches kids that there is a correct way to speak. There's a right way to write. There's a right tone, pace, and structure. And if you do not follow these rules, your ideas matter less. And that's frustrating. So literacy becomes less about meaning and more about manners. And it's less about communication. It is more about presentation and less about truth and more about respectability. And just like etiquette classes, dominant literacy centers white norms. It treats cultural language as something to correct. It rewards kids who already know the rules. And it disciplines kids who are expressive and emotional, out-of-the-box thinkers who are nonlinear and even like multilingual kids, right? It is so freaking disrespectful or passive aggressive the way this country treats people who speak their native language and then they're learning English. It is incredible to be able to have that skill. I just was not ever able to speak Spanish, but my brother was able to pick up the language. And I don't know. I've taken a lot of Spanish classes. If you throw me, like when we lived in Mexico, you threw me in it, I was able to, it was coming back to me, but I still wasn't at the point where I was speaking full fluent sentences. Like, you're speaking to me and I'm picking out the words and I'm able to put the things together, right? And I can put together words to give you a response. But like my brother is fully bilingual. He can read it, he can write it. Just, I don't know, maybe I didn't apply myself, or it was just that much more difficult for me. But when, and I feel like this pushes, like, kids learn early that some voices sound smart. Those voices are more trustworthy. Some speaking needs to be fixed, or that being understood matters less than being palatable. And again, that goes along with like the aesthetic, the way you look, the way you present. And when we look at decolonized literacy, it asks a different question. It says, can this child make meaning and communication truth? Not do they sound polished enough to be taken seriously? And like, I would even say that for this podcast, I got a comment about not sounding academic, which is fine. I'm okay with that, right? But it made the conversation on this show more relatable. When I'm looking or listening to different podcasts, I understand it. I get what they mean. But some people really like this non-academic version that I offer. And some people are like, oh, she sounds really unprofessional. And that's your opinion. And maybe you're looking at it from a, colonized lens. What decolonized literacy actually looks like and what we're going to do instead. So, if dominant literacy is about being polished and having a great performance and palatability, what does decolonized literacy actually look like? So let's clear it up. So decolonized literacy is not a curriculum that you can purchase. It's not a checklist. It's not a vibe, and it's definitely not something you quote unquote finish. It is a practice. It's a way of relating to language and meaning and voice. And it starts with a belief shift, because instead of asking, is this correct? We're going to ask, is this meaningful? And we're going to ponder on that. Can we make the connections? And does this sound academic? We're not going to ask, does it sound academic? We're going to does this sound like them? Decolonized literacy is rooted, I feel, I was bouncing back and forth ideas with my husband, but it's core ideas, right? Language is cultural. And meaning comes before mechanics. And storytelling is knowledge. It's something we've passed down ancestrally. And our voices matter more than being polished. And we don't have to use, you can use a double negative and still get the point across, is what I'm saying. Instead of saying, oh, I know. When someone's talking, they're like, oh, use a double negative. So you understood what I was saying. I said what I said. But literacy is rational and it's not performative. And so that means we stop treating literacy like a performance for an assessment, and we start treating it like communication between humans. And what that looks like is like a kid telling a very long-winded story, and we give them the space to not get to the point right away. And I know we've all been there, because like right now, my youngest is into Pokemon, and he wants to tell me about Galar and Pikachu not wanting to evolve, but he would really be into Raichu. And I'm like, okay, I really want to do other things, but I'm giving him that space. And it's a kid, when they're explaining something out loud, but freezing when asked to write it. If you can articulate it through your voice, then let's vibe with it. A poem that breaks grammar rules but tells the truth, I think it's beautiful. And when we look at a comic strip with 3 words, again, it's a comic strip with 3 words. So what's involved with the comic strip? Visuals, right? And the visuals can give us a lot of meaning, a lot of storytelling, even though it only has 3 words. And understand that's part of literacy. Now, I will say, I think this is the dominant culture in me, but a voice note instead of a paragraph, y'all. Okay. So it's a double, it's a couple of things with the voice notes. I don't like sending voice notes. Heck, I really have a hard time hearing my voice on this podcast. And I don't like listening to it because sometimes I don't want everyone to hear my business. Then the other part is I'm a double texter. I enjoy, I text the way I talk, and I'll send a couple of words, then it's like a pause. And then sometimes I text way too fast. And then there's misspelled words, but it's just because I'm just going. I'm in the moment and my brain's thinking faster than I can type. But you know what I mean? Then you know what I mean, but I'm not going to go back and fix it. But yes, if you are comfortable sending that voice note, send the voice note instead of a paragraph. Oh, and instead of saying fix this, get curious and ask hey, what are you trying to say? What were you trying to ask? Oh man, my really good friend, I would send him, do y'all remember? Some of y'all might not remember, but whenever you had to do the predictive text on phones like the Razor phone and stuff in the late 2009 2008 somewhere around there, and I was new and I have some very I have very thick fingers. I have short stubby fingers and it just wasn't vibing, and my friend would be a grammar police and it would irk me, and they were like that when social media X and Twitter was popping. I was like, okay, this is getting too much. But you understand the point. Quit doing that. Go work your 9 to 5 because it's definitely he wasn't a teacher. But anyway, that was my little soapbox rant. But I'm sure we've all met people like that, and if you're that person, it is mad annoying. Don't be that person. But it's especially when we do this to kids and we're like, what were you, instead of saying fix this, we need to say, what are you trying to say? Because when kids hear that, it could diminish them. But if we ask clarifying questions, they're more willing to refine their voice and what they're trying to say or their point of view. And that's the difference between us motivating and having confident kids versus kids who don't ever develop their voice or feel, low self-esteem about it. And when we are really believing and shifting our belief system to decolonized literacy, this doesn't mean that we are ignoring the skill building. We are repositioning it. We are looking at grammar, spelling, structure. Those things still exist, but they come after the voice, not before it. They're not the priority of the skill. And skills are tools. They're not gatekeepers. So we don't teach kids to write so that they can be acceptable. We teach kids to write so that they can be understood and that the shift matters, because again, we're all homeschooling for our kids. And when kids learn that their voice is valid before it's polished, they'll take risks, they'll revise, they'll grow, they'll have this level of confidence. And we can sit back as parents and be like, okay, I did that. This is powerful. I have a powerful kid. And they don't have that fear of being corrected or being wrong, or they don't harp on an idea because they have this desire to be 100% clear the first time. And that's the literacy that actually matters, and it lasts. And and this is a belief we have strongly in my family. My husband is a poet. He teaches poetry writing classes. He was an English teacher. And he did a youth poetry slam team. But anyway, I don't know if y'all from my earlier episodes, poetry is a big deal in my house, right? And I love when he teaches classes, especially workshops and school districts and stuff, because he does look at literacy from a decolonized lens, and it goes against like the system structures they're learning in everyday classrooms. And so when he's just empowering their voice through the sessions, and at the end, some of the sessions are cool and they end up doing like a poetry slam or like a community share. And the teachers come back and they're like, wow, I had no idea. I get them to, I struggle with this student, such and such. But it's really empowering their voice over the mechanics. And that's when we've seen it at different districts. That's when the magic happens. So, and I don't know, but we firmly, when people talk about things or do things, I don't know if it's always necessarily who they are or aligns with their values, but this is something that truly is embedded not only in our homeschooling, but like in our family's just value and core belief system. But are they really reading? This is one of those questions that like will haunt us at 2 a.m. And this is usually the moment right after we've convinced ourselves that we are doing something intentional and grounded. Then we have the voice that creeps in and causes self-doubt and asks us, are they really reading? And I don't know. I feel like once that question happens and I start doom scrolling, on social media, looking at different homeschooling reels, and then I'm even deeper into the idea that I'm not doing enough. And I don't know. Then I start counting back like, hey, they listen to audiobooks. Do audiobooks count? Yes, Ashley, they do count. Chill out. They love graphic novels, but are those real books? Yes, Ashley, graphic novels are real books and they count. Chill out. And then if they read the same book over and over, and I'm like, yes, they do. I have nothing to worry about. That is still reading, but I still sometimes have to go in and, reassure myself. So I want to offer you that reassurance. If your kid is engaging with language, they are reading. Reading does not only just mean chapter books, or they have to sit in a corner and be silent, or they have to read a book cover to cover, or they're not, it looks like they're just so studious by sitting still. No, reading does include audiobooks. It does include subtitles. It does include graphic novels and comic books. It does include song lyrics. It does include reading instructions and captions and signs and menus and rereading their favorite book. When I was in 5th grade, I reread Little Women 4 times. I loved Little Women. I loved everything that Joe stood for. And I remember my teacher saying, yeah, like at first it was cool and interesting. They're like, are you sure you're reading it, or are you just carrying the book around? Offensive. But it's not laziness. That's them mastering the skill. And that's a kid saying, I know this story. I feel safe here. I'm catching things I missed. And even as an adult, I will go back and reread things because things mean something different to me. Oh my gosh. So when I would say like a freshman in high school, I read this book, which I had no business reading. And it was called Tracy by Omar Tyree. And she was like this around the way girl. And she, was kind of nerdy. Then she like blossomed and all the boys liked her. And anyway, so I remember like wanting to read everything by Omar Tyree. And now I went back and read that book, I think like 2 summers ago. And I'm like, girl, I would never let my kid read this book. I don't know why I thought it was some awakening, right? But that's a really, I guess, exaggerated example. But what was cool and interesting and fascinating to me at 14, it had a completely different meaning for me at 35. And it's the same thing. So and like we're diving into the Little Women series or books here because my middle kid is into it. So I'm planning to reread it with her. So I'm sure I'm going to have like a different thought process, and I'm going to have memories about the moments that just made me like, aha, versus now. So it's interesting. So yes, it's okay if they reread books. It might be their comfort blanket. And decolonized literacy values engagement over endurance. You guys, we are not training kids for book reports. We are supporting them in making meaning. And I don't know if this is a funny, but most adults don't even read the way schools say kids should read. Right? I saw a social media thing that goes around that said if you read one book this year, closing out 2025, you've read more than 70% of American adults. That's freaking crazy. That's wild. Yeah, we need to read. I feel like adults skim or abandon books. I'm a book abandoner. I just put it in my DNR. Or we think we read memes and captions, but somehow that's okay for us, but it's not okay for our kids. And if our kids were just skimming through things and they were abandoning books halfway through, which was most of the books that, we've offered them or they've picked up themselves and they just read memes and comments, we would judge them. And we would really seriously say, that's not enough reading. But as adults, that's what we think. That's what we accept. So be serious. Comprehension isn't proven by suffering. A child or a kid who listens deeply and asks questions and makes connections, they're not behind. They are building literacy in a way that matters. So that's why it's so important to read. It's always important to read, but especially when they're little, do they have all of the tools to read every word on the page? No. But when we inflect our voices, when we give them, we talk through the pictures and the characters, that's building their literacy. What does writing without colonial pressure look like? So let's dig into writing, because this is usually where I feel like tension really shows up. A lot of us were taught writing where we plan first, we write neatly, we stay on topic, we don't repeat ourselves, we got to edit, and, don't be too emotional in your writing. And if you struggled with writing as a kid, there's a good chance it wasn't because you didn't have ideas. It's because your voice was being policed before it was supported. And colonized writing gives us instructions that prioritize the presentation over the meaning and having correctness over clarity and communication over control. So what does that translate to kids? Kids, they learn that I don't know how to say this the right way, so I'm not going to say it, or I'm scared to mess it up, or I'll just write less. And decolonized writing flips that completely. So instead of starting with rules, we're going to start with the voice. And again, we're not going to say fix this. We are going to say, what are you trying to say? Because we're trying to empower their voice. And we do not give in to the red pen energy. We listen first. And at home, what does that look like? As homeschoolers, what does that look like? So we're going to let kids talk before they write. We will give them the option of recording voice notes and transcribing later, and letting their long-winded conversation be the story that it is. And, we will look at poetry instead of paragraphs and lists instead of essays, because that's the part that matters most. Editing becomes a collaboration and not like a corrective issue, because we're not going to hover, we're not going to rewrite, we're not going to make their voices sound like ours because we want it to sound a certain way. And I will say that is definitely a struggle, right? And I feel like as homeschoolers, sometimes we can take it deeply personal. because whatever our kids produce, whenever they're like maybe taking an outsourced class or taking advantage of an outsourced opportunity, whatever they're writing or speaking, I know me, I might not, maybe I don't speak for all the homeschooling parents, but I'm like, oh my gosh, if they think they can't speak well or da 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 da, that's a reflection of me. When the whole time it really wasn't anything that I've prioritized, right? But that colonized lens gets me and my ego and my pride whenever they're like in other spaces, and I have to check my program. That's a me problem, not a them. And I don't want you to say, like, Ashley, are you trying to tell me that grammar and spelling and structure don't matter? No, they do, but they come after the idea is safe. Because when our kids trust their voice, then they understand that their voice won't be shut down, that they can take the risk, they can revise, and they can grow. We want to empower the voice before we offer the structure, right? We don't want it's the same thing, right? When we're looking at like gentle parenting and raising these change makers, or just kids who are comfortable speaking up for themselves, we're the ones they have to practice on. So if we're the homeschooling parent that was like micromanaging and, diminishing their voice, they're not going to use the voice we want them to write with because we told them it was small and it was incorrect. So that's like our challenge as parents. And we don't want our kids not to speak up because that they're afraid of being wrong, but because they're afraid of being misunderstood. And that's why we need to challenge ourselves to ask them, what are you trying to say here, instead of fix it. And that's writing that lasts longer than any other like worksheet opportunity that they could have, right? I don't know. I have some writers at home, and I know there's been times where I've had to check how I address them because I don't want their voices to be not heard, or especially because of me. And again, and some of this is just a reflection in my own educational journey. Like, I was a writer, and I mentioned it, I think, before, that I won a writing contest and I got to go stay at the Oprah Winfrey property in Telluride, Colorado. I think I was maybe 12 or 13, but I loved writing. And then I remember when I stopped loving writing, when it was more technical and when it was more of like the fix this, or, it was bloody red. And what I thought, it wasn't like, hey, this was a really good thought. It was, hey, this is terrible. This is an F. I'm not even going to read it until it meets these basic standards. And then it became more of that. And I felt my love for writing slowly go away. And so when I'm looking at the reflection of my kids, I'm like, okay, what happened and where did that spark leave me? What did that look like? How can I change that for my kids so that they can continue to love their love of learning? So what does this actually look like at home? Like, what do real practices look like? Decolonized literacy doesn't live, again, in a philosophy book. It lives on your couch, your kitchen table, in the car, during any conversations, listening to your kids' long-winded stories. And this work is less about adding more, and I feel like it's more about loosening your grip. So here are some ways decolonized literacy can show up in your own home or in your classroom if you're a teacher, because, hey, there are some teachers listening. First, give your kids the space to journal without any correction, not for grammar, not for handwriting, not for any assessments. Just place where your kids can put their thoughts down without being edited or judged. Again, this means you are not giving them any red pen energy. You're not fixing anything. You're not helping them spell anything. You're just giving them the freedom to express. Second, it's family storytelling. And this could be Like, this means everybody in the family sitting down and sharing stories. This could be something you do at the dinner table, or just talking about your own childhood, retelling some family history, making up stories together. And if you let kids tell a story that goes nowhere and everywhere at the same time, that's fun. It's challenging your own critical thinking skills. But what does storytelling do? It builds narrative skills, it builds sequencing and vocabulary and confidence. And you know what? You didn't need a single worksheet. You didn't have to create one. You didn't have to buy one. You didn't have to hunt one down. You were building in the skill by just storytelling. Or like, you could do one where you start the story and then the next person adds on and adds on and adds on, and then ask like, hey, is this where you thought the story was going when it's over with? That's funny because in my family, when that happens, there always ends up being a fart. Yeah, a fart. Well, we don't call them farts in my house. My son calls them butt burps. So in every story, there's been butt burps, and he thinks they're so funny. It could be someone eating spaghetti and got butt burps, or someone getting on a plane, then they had butt burps. And then another thing that I want to offer you guys is reading together. Yes, even with older kids, read alouds. They're not just for little kids. It's a relational thing. It builds comprehension, attention, and discussion. And audiobooks count. Like, my family is known for listening to audiobooks in the car. We are in the car so much, going, everywhere all the time. And so we have a family audiobook that we listen to in the car instead of listening to music. Why not? And then there's been times where we're like, oh my gosh, this is so good. So then we'll lay in my bed sometimes in the morning, or like before nighttime, or before it's like bedtime, and listen to the audiobook together. And then we're like, oh my gosh, the chisme. Oh my gosh, it's getting juicy. My anxiety. I can't go to bed yet. I got to listen to the next chapter. And we're all contributing, right? Because yes, audiobooks count, and listening is literacy. And a fourth thing you could do is let kids choose what they want to read. I know some people need to police their kids and look it up to see if it's age appropriate. I get that. But what I'm saying here is, don't count out comic books or graphic novels, or if they read the same series over again. Like, I know my oldest read the Kelly Yang series a couple of times. The Front Desk series a couple times. And she read the whole, what is that? It was a dragon series, and then they came out Wings of Fire. She read the whole Wings of Fire series, and then turned around and read the graphic novel version of the series. So then I was like, what is the difference? Comparing, contrasting them or whatever. And that was a long-winded explanation that she was totally geeking out of. And I was excited to participate in. But again, I didn't want to rob her. And also, don't discount books that you feel are too easy for your kid. Because you know what? Choice builds engagement, and engagement builds skill. And if your kid's just not a reader, an audiobook, don't stop offering them books or opportunities for books and storytelling. I've did an episode on this, but especially as BIPOC people, because we were not allowed to read, we were outlawed, we were killed and murdered for not reading. I don't accept non-readers or non-listeners to storytellers. So it's literacy. I mean, reading is not it's not an option in my house. So we just keep offering until something sticks. What does writing look like? So instead of assigning writing, look at where writing shows up. Yes, text messages count, emails, Google Docs, notes, scripts or instructions that they're writing. That's all literacy that counts. And talk about the text instead of quizzing them. Just like what were you trying to say here? What was the backstory here? Can you give me some more context? And they don't necessarily have to be comprehension questions. You just need conversation. You need to get them talking. Ask them, like, what stood out to you? Why did this relate to you? Did this feel true? What made it not feel true? What made you uncomfortable? What made you laugh? What made you uncomfortable? I said that. What would you change? How could you create a different outcome? Like, there are no right answers. The goal isn't to recall anything. It's about connecting and making meaning. And again, this is what decolonized literacy is. It's not loud, it's not flashy, it's definitely not fancy, and it doesn't always look quote unquote productive, but it's steady and it's relational and it's building something much deeper than compliance. Before we close out, I want to be clear, offer a better understanding of what decolonized literacy isn't, what it is not. Anytime we talk about loosening control, people will say, well, that means anything goes. There's no standards, no expectations. And that's not what this is. Decolonized literacy is not ignoring skill building. We're not avoiding anything challenging. We're not letting our kids just flounder, and we are not pretending that structure itself is harmful or we're acting like it doesn't matter, because it's also not kids will just figure it out on their own forever, which that's triggering for me because I feel like sometimes a lot of people, especially like with people who have a loose idea of the unschooling philosophy, is how they approach a lot of things, that kids will just figure it out on their own. And that is not necessarily the case. So that's yeah. So, and and this is also not kids refusing feedback or rejecting tools that help kids communicate more clearly. Decolonized literacy what it does is shift when and why we introduce skills. So instead of using grammar and structure as the gatekeepers, we are going to look at them as tools. And instead of teaching rules so our kids can be acceptable and master the etiquette class, we're going to teach skills so kids can be understood, so that there's still structure and expectations and they'll still grow, but it's rooted in more of a relationship and building their self-esteem instead of fear. And I feel like the most important part that decolonized literacy does, it means we doesn't mean we abandon preparation for the real world. It means we are preparing our kids without requiring them to erase themselves to succeed. Again, it means we are preparing kids without requiring them to erase themselves to succeed. And we can teach code switching without teaching shame, right? We can teach academic language without teaching superiority. And we can help kids navigate these dominant systems without pretending that those systems are neutral. Because that's balance, and it's not rejection, it's not assimilation, but at the end of the day, that is what you call being intentional. So before you go, or I'm closing out this episode, I do want to leave you with a question, and it's not something I want you to feel like you have to answer immediately, more so than just sitting with it. So, when your kid speaks, or they're writing, or they're telling a story, or they're asking you questions, look at them and truly see them. Do they feel, or do you feel like they are performing for approval, or like they're communicating something that matters? And if the answer feels complicated, that's okay. And that just means this work is layered and you're allowed to learn alongside your kids. A lot of these experiences and opportunities we are offering our kids are very much new to us, right? Because a lot of us are intentionally working on breaking generational curses. If this episode resonated with you, please take a moment to comment, like, follow, subscribe, review, wherever you are listening. It helps the show reach families who are, wanting to be a part of the similar conversations that we have here on the Secular Homeschool Revolution. And I do want you to remember, as you head back into your day, please understand you don't have to homeschool perfectly to homeschool intentionally. You don't have to dismantle everything at once to make it a meaningful change, and you don't have to look like school to make it look like your kids are really learning. You are just choosing curiosity over control, and relationship over performance, and voice over compliance. You are already being revolutionary, and I thank you for being here, and I'll talk to you soon.